Mm.
I had never actually planned to go into venture capital at all. I think like the key thing to remember is technical is such a moving target. And maybe I should have studied something else. And I think we just need to democratize audacity a little bit more. So like don't wait for permission.
My guest today has a theory that might be the most important idea in tech right now, and it has nothing to do with the tools everyone is obsessing over. It's about what happens to the human layer underneath them. Zara Zaman co-founded Edventure, the first pan-European university venture builder, running deep tech programs with universities across Europe, and in 2021, hosting the largest university entrepreneurship conference for students and researchers across more than 45 countries. Now, she's an investor and head of platform at Emerge, a $73 million early-stage fund backing the future of work and learning. She also leads Emerge's venture partner community, a network of 100 of the world's top founders, operators, and executives from companies like OpenAI, Microsoft, Duolingo, Kahoot, and Udemy. For the last few years, she's been living out of a suitcase, working from a different country every month or so. Argentina, Japan, South Africa, and counting. That's not just a lifestyle choice. As you'll hear, it's a deliberate strategy for staying grounded in what technology actually means in most people's lives. In this conversation, we talk about what it really means to have agency and why it's not a one-time awakening. It's a question we keep returning to. We get into how she built Edventure with her co-founders, why most companies are completely stuck when it comes to actually deploying AI, and what permissionless building really looks like in practice. We also talked about democratizing audacity and why the most valuable skills in tech have never really been technical. I'm your host, Aishwarya G. Rai, and this is Next Gen Doers. Welcome, Zara, to Next Gen Doers.
Thanks so much for having me, Ash. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Let's get into it. So, first question for you. What's been giving you energy lately and something that you're extremely curious about right now?
There is something I keep coming back to, which I call like the social infrastructure of learning and work. So I think not the AI tools themselves that we're looking at, which there's a lot of exciting things happening in that category. Everyone is talking about those. But I do find myself thinking a lot about the human layer underneath, like the mentorship, the serendipitous conversations, the feeling of, being seen by someone who really believes in you before you believe in yourself. And I think this is becoming increasingly urgent rather than less, and is more and more of like how we learn and how we work ends up moving online. And honestly, like as we collaborate more with our LLMs than our colleagues, I do worry about whether enough people are thinking about how do we preserve that human interaction part and the stuff that doesn't show up maybe in your productivity metrics, but I think it's like sort of quietly load bearing for how people actually grow in their lives and their careers. And I think there's this great essay that I really love by Tyler Cohen that makes the case that one of the highest ROI activities that you can do for another person or society at large is simply like raising people's aspirations early in their life or career. That at a critical moment, you can say one sentence that really changes someone's trajectory. Whether it's like, "Oh, you should.
Yeah.
That's a great idea. Go build that," or "You're a really good writer. You should write more." And I do wonder, like, are we actually building technology that allows and has space for more of these moments? Or are we kind of engineering them out by like focusing so much on like how do we make everyone more efficient and more productive? So I don't have a super clean answer on this, but my instinct is like we will see a lot more people trying to return to community online and in person, but specifically focus on trying to connect with each other, not just to sort of content or tools, which we are seeing, a plethora of. And I think that's like very interesting space to watch right now.
Absolutely. And it'd be interesting to see how capital flows also match what seems to be a potential trend, right? But I'm curious, you mentioned that aspirational statement or encouragement from a young age. I mean, can you think about a moment in your own life where someone might have said something that kind of set the aspirations for you?
I think it's not one specific moment. I've been very lucky to have been always surrounded by, great teachers, my parents, friends have always been very supportive of whatever project I've been working on the side. I remember when I was in school, my first business, I say in quotation marks, was I used to sew handbags and then go to the sixth formers when I was maybe like
What?
12 years old, buy these for me, maybe some emotional blackmail involved. And I remember my mom would take me to go and buy all the material. And I would get really excited with
Wow.
doing all the numbers and being like, Mom, I made a profit. And she would joke that, yeah, well, you never factored in the cost of materials that happens to appear on your desk, you know? But they always really supported that, and, it was never like, "Oh, why are you wasting time on this? Focus on your studies." So they were super encouraging on that front. And I will say
Yeah.
also at university, I went to the University of Edinburgh, and they did a really good job of supporting what we wanted to do. We'll talk, I guess, later about Edventure, the incubator we set up, but they really did
Yep.
support us a lot. So I really appreciate that.
I dig that. Also, shout out to mom for being your angel investor back then.
She
Um,
was, she was.
and we definitely will get to adventure, but I'd love to ask you about a belief about work, getting out there and doing stuff. This whole podcast is about doers and doing. What's a belief about doing that you've had to change your mind on in the last, let's say, 2, 3 years, or whatever horizon suits you?
I love questions that are like, "What have you changed your mind about?" I think I take a very broad definition of work as well, so not just necessarily work in terms of your career, but also work as in anything that is, fulfilling to you that you want to direct your time towards. I'd say I've had a couple of shifts, maybe one more recently and one at university. And I think that the most fundamental shift came in university, which was sort of realizing that you have a lot more power to shape your life than people think, or that we're maybe trained to think in school. And there's that great Steve Jobs quote that I'm probably going to butcher, but essentially saying that everything you see around you was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And I think like
Mhm.
it's beyond school. Most rules are essentially inherited habits. We have these social scripts and no one really questions them. And you don't necessarily have to break them, but it's really useful to know that they're quite malleable. So you can ask for like promotions early, you can ask for an internship when you don't meet all the requirements, you can move countries, you can just start whatever project it is you're interested in and whatever the sort of minimum viable product version of that is. And I think a lot of the time, sometimes there are real constraints, but a lot of the time, whether or not you can do those things comes down to whether you believe you can and want to enough. And I think what I learned, or maybe more accurately, relearned recently, is it's not this like one time awakening. Like, I think you don't really discover agency and then suddenly apply it uniformly across your whole life. I find people are very multifaceted and it doesn't work like that. Like, I've seen the most ambitious, just do it people at work who end up being quite passive maybe in their personal lives. And I've seen people with
Mm.
very, ordinary 9 to 5s where they leave their work at the door with the most extraordinary personal lives and hobbies and talents. And you see their passion like pour out of them when they speak and you ask them about it. And I think what I've come to believe is it's really easy to also forget that you have agency and go on autopilot, including
Right.
myself. And I think you have to keep asking yourself, like, is what I'm doing really serving me? Is it giving me energy? Is it aligned with, is what I say I want aligned with my actual actions? And I think it's maybe less of a revelation, but more a question you keep returning to. And I think, a reminder that agency takes a lot of effort, and it's
Right.
a conversation you keep having with yourself.
Absolutely. A lot of intentionality, right? And reckoning with where you are and where you want to be. And kind of making the steps between that. So for context for our listeners over here, Zara and I went to school together, and I think Zara joined towards the end of our secondary education, I would say. I remember when Zara came to our school, it was very clear that she kind of walked to her own beat. And it's really cool to see this kind of consistency in that level of high agency that you have as a person. So you said relearn that, and I imagine it is one of those lifelong lessons, right? That you kind of just have to remind yourself, I can change the situation if I want to, permitting some factors.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it was. I'm super glad we got to overlap. It was only a very brief time. But
Yeah.
yeah, I felt a very similar thing from you as well. So I always really admired that about you.
Oh man, okay, that's too sweet. Let's get into talking about adventure. So I can't say that I know too many university students that have founded a venture builder and accelerator, and certainly not ones that are as successful as Adventure. I think It's now scaled across 26 or more universities across Europe for context. Could you tell us about the spark that led to the creation of Edventure?
So I had two wonderful co-founders for Adventure. And I think one summer we were talking about how, with all our gripes about the US, one thing it does really, really well is it instills a sense of entrepreneurialism and ambition in students on campuses. And I think they position the idea of starting a business as a real viable career option, something to aspire to, and something that's very accessible to all people. And I think, they do a really good job of that. Also, I really like the idea that, you can have a major and you do minors in multiple different subjects and you get exposure to topics like outside of your major, which, UK and Europe, you really don't. And I think, in terms of the sort of promoting entrepreneurship and getting more students to really consider it and try it out, Europe sucks at that in comparison. And it's a shame because we have great talent, we have great institutions, and unfortunately, we feed them this narrative that success is either, going and working for a consulting firm, a banking firm, or maybe, devoting your life to academia. And I think universities are such a genuinely like great melting pot of everything you need to build a startup. You have fresh ideas, you have diversity, tenacity, you have this like enough optimism to believe that you can actually make a change. And I think maybe some naivety is actually quite good in this respect. But infrastructure around students, you have these career fairs with HSBC pushing out branded pens and like, that's largely it. And I just thought, like, my co-founders and I, we'd each tried to build something ourselves and on a different scale back in school. So we knew what it felt like to do it alone, underprepared. But we also knew what it felt like when things are working, how exciting it was to be building something yourself. And so we wanted to create conditions for people to just give it a try, to expand the
Mm.
horizons of what people considered was possible in terms of a career. And particularly, I think for folks from underrepresented backgrounds in tech, we largely saw of the people that were interested in startups and technology, people were coming from very similar backgrounds. They were studying similar subjects, and you didn't see as many women or people from humanities subjects, for example. And actually, I thought having a good balance between STEM and humanities is one of the best things you can do when you're founding a company and you need that sort of diversity and perspective. So,
Yeah.
yeah, we started with like no funding, a borrowed room, was meant to be for students by students. We actually didn't plan to turn it into a business to make money. It actually happened sort of serendipitously along that journey. But yeah, we started it because we just wanted to see more people in Europe start companies, particularly at a time in your life where you have relatively little commitments. You don't have that pressure of maybe supporting a family or paying a mortgage or like
Right.
massive loans to pay off. Maybe you have some student loans, but it's probably the best time to take a risk in your life. And I think like
Absolutely.
that barrier in many ways becomes higher as you work your way up the career ladder and suddenly you have to say no to, how many years you've poured into one firm, like a bigger paycheck they put in front of you.
Yeah, and I mean, mentioning that, the scaling and the profitability aspect of it all was serendipitous, right? What were some of the steps that you and your co-founders took to help reach that level of scale? And at the time, you were also a student, so I'm very curious about, how you balanced those two things.
I'll be honest, there wasn't that much balance. It was
Great.
quite all
Okay.
consuming. I think COVID in a way um was a gift in disguise when it came to adventure specifically, because suddenly I was actually living in Jordan on my year abroad. Suddenly everything moved online. And after that, we were all on Zoom, going to classes and lectures. I was doing languages, which, I think I I could do with relatively little effort compared to maybe my one of my co-founders was studying neuroscience, which I think took a lot more of his time. Um, but I think I had a lot more time than I did when I was on campus and in person and, going to all these societies and events and, you had all your social life as well. And suddenly all this time was given back to you. And at the same time, so many students were doing the same thing, sitting in front of their screens. And actually, it was useful. And then, we thought, given that everyone is on Zoom anyway, if you want to start a company, why should you be limited to your campus, your university, or even your country when actually pretty much everyone on the same time zone should be your pool of potential co-founders or co-conspirators,
Wow.
whatever you want to call it. So it really helped that everything was on Zoom, and we started building a team. I think it really spread through social media. Got a lot of applications of people that were interested, and I think that first team of maybe like 7 people, they were really, really instrumental in what we were able to build. And it was very community led actually. So I think in terms of scaling it, we really focused on that aspect. We didn't try and like clone a central model at every campus. We found the one
Right.
or two people at the university we wanted to grow at who had that same relentlessness, that same frustration with the status quo. We gave them a framework and tried to get mostly out of their way. And the network kind of grew itself because I think the people in it wanted to be there. And like I think you can't really manufacture that kind of buy-in. You have to earn it and then like, build trust. But yeah,
Right.
again, like I will say we had a wonderful core team and a lot of people that came and supported the mission in various capacities. So yeah, super grateful for all the people that gave their time up, including, the first few versions of the cohort. We had nothing to show for it. We were just pulling together
Oh
a
my
10-week
gosh, yeah.
program that we had directionally put together from our research what we thought was important to build a great company, and we emailed all the unicorn founders that have ever come out of Scotland first, because we were, all students at University of Edinburgh, and said, "Hey, we're building this at your alma mater. Will you come and support entrepreneurship on, coming out of
Wow.
it?" And I think like the fact that it was also online and then COVID, so I'm sure even they had some time given back to them. All of them said yes. So it was great. We actually had the best possible teachers in our first cohort. The founder of Skyscanner, the founder of Brewdog, yeah, FanDuel, for example. And so they built these massive companies, and the students got to learn from the best in the business for free. So that was pretty cool. And yeah, I really appreciate everyone that gave that time up to come and give back to people when we put that together.
That's really cool, and certainly, I mean, I can see the advantage of the time period, but there is that kind of, like, openness required, right? To see the opportunity. It's like that mental openness to scan the environment and make the most of the situation. So very cool twist on that. But one question that pops up for me whenever I hear about anything entrepreneurial is failure. A lot of entrepreneurs are told, "Fail, fail often, fail fast." And I think there's a glamorization of the term failure, but there's obviously the tough parts of it. And I'd love to ask, did you ever have any failures in, the early stages of Edventure? And yeah, how did you get through them?
I'm trying to think back. There were definitely moments where, we'd poured everything into a cohort or an event, and then the turnout would be thin, or the energy wasn't there, or people weren't necessarily there for the right reasons. And I think like the hard thing also about something like adventures, everyone is a student. So you could put all of these time requirements in the contract they sign when they join a cohort, but inevitably some people would be flaky when, maybe you have multiple deadlines and it becomes really stressful, and that's the priority. But it's really hard when teams fell apart because of that, because you have like 5 people you brought together, and if
Yeah.
if they lose 2 members, it impacts the other 3 as well. So definitely I think it taught us a lot about how important it is to be flexible, and to be able to adapt to changing circumstances. So we definitely had some difficulties even within our own team, particularly when we had contractual obligations to a university to deliver XYZ, and it just ended up that some team members had some like course requirements that conflicted. And yeah, I think it is hard when you're operating with students sometimes. But then that said, also I think like the overall stress level has to be lower because there's a bit less at stake, right? You're building this mostly out of passion and for fun, and you're also studying at the same time. I think it's different when you're betting everything on a company and you've poured your own resources, financial or otherwise into it. So the stakes were a little bit lower for us. But yeah, we definitely had those moments where, we didn't know if this event we'd been working on for so long was going to work out, or, we hosted this massive virtual conference for like students and researchers worldwide. And we had maybe 1,000 plus attendees. And I remember we were having tech issues. And
Oh boy.
we had yeah, and so, like, one of the sessions, like, everyone's in the waiting room, and like it just was not working. And so yeah, it was stressful. People are generally like fairly understanding about these things. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's just learning how to navigate that, communicate well, and being able to like inject that energy and positivity back into
Right.
a room.
I can see that. Rolling with the punches is what comes to mind of just the passion is there, the vision is there. There are gonna be dips along the way. The destination is still within sight. So I think it's becoming clear for our listeners that a lot of your work in venture is education related, either within the education ecosystem or now even with the merge, focusing on the future of jobs and of work, ed tech and the like. And I'd really love to explore if there's a particular reason that you've chosen to focus on education.
Partly personal. So both my parents grew up with very little in Pakistan, and they got scholarships to study, one in the UK, one in the US, and it completely transformed their lives. And it meant that the access to education and opportunity my siblings and I had was so vastly different than anything they could have imagined themselves as kids. And I think especially as a woman, when in many regions of the world, I think the importance of education is not a given. You know, why educate your daughter when you're going to marry her off anyway? I think I always had, especially the older I got, maybe when you're young, you go to school and it's like frustrating to wake up early and then do homework and all of this. But I think the older I got, um, the more I was like, wow, like what an intense privilege it is to have this that opens so many doors later on. So I think part of it is that, and the luck of just being born at the right place at the right time. Um, and then also like I just think it's the most leveraged intervention I could possibly imagine. Like if you change someone's beliefs about their own potential and, obviously open actual doors for them, everything you change everything downstream essentially. And I think there's like this gap between what's possible and what's currently happening in the space. It's just enormous. And I think like that potential gap was super exciting to me. In terms of like where to invest my time. Is that saying that talent is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And so
Mm.
I had never actually planned to go into venture capital at all. But when I met the Emerge team, all partners are kids of immigrants, refugees, or working class parents, and their story resonates a lot with me. And I really like this idea of actually, we're really focused on investing in technologies that make other people's journeys less reliant on luck. So yeah, I like that a lot.
I really love that. I think there's a quote that goes, luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. But I would like to actually default a little bit more to the quote that you brought up, because indeed it is a matter of opportunity and just not always being present and available. I want to narrow it down a bit more into your education journey as well. And I think you hit on this a little bit earlier about diversity of, let's say, education and education types when it comes to venture. And specifically with you, you studied Arabic and French. And you've spoken about communication and collaboration being central to what you do, and starting with Edventure, of course, and I'm sure many other things that you have launched. Did languages or even the humanities in general play any part in shaping your worldview as a builder in a largely tech ecosystem?
It's funny, I actually in university, I went to study English literature and I loved it in high school. And then I went to university and I remember suddenly I met all these people that were studying economics or artificial intelligence, computer science. And I remember meeting them going, wow, this is actually like so much more interesting because you're learning about all these applications of this in the real world. When we studied it in school, it was very much like theoretical, learning it out of a textbook. And so maths and science, I actually did as much of it as possible early so I could like never do it again. Which I think largely I regretted it for a really long time. I felt really smart at the time, like at 15, going, "Oh, I did all my exams really early, and so I don't have to ever touch physics." And then, I met people that would explain these concepts to me, and I was like, "Wow, that's so cool!" I really like shot myself in the foot. So I think like I did feel this frustration, especially going back to the point of like what the US does really well of being able to touch on a lot of different subjects. Like, I really would have loved to have been able to do a science subject, a language, politics, philosophy, do a bunch of different things. And, I think like largely, the graduates we'd end up with, if you had a little bit of a sort of overview of each of these topics, you're in a much better starting position than if you just studied one thing for 4 years. But Anyways, I kind of was in this position of I was studying English literature, realized that I didn't see the applications in the real world enough, and I was just like, I wanted to do something that felt a bit more tangible, for lack of a better word. And the only thing I could switch to, without having to repeat a year and apply to university all over again was languages. So I was like, you know what? Fine. I will study French, Arabic, Middle Eastern studies, and at least I'll be able to communicate with people in another language when I graduate.
Yeah.
And I think going back to your question, like, did languages or like humanities play a part in worldview shaping? I think perhaps, like, but in a way that maybe I didn't appreciate until later. I think there's this on the languages part, there's this feeling you get when you speak to someone in their own language. And perhaps like your level is really not very good. Yet
Right.
their eyes feel like light up in a way that doesn't happen otherwise. Even if you both speak English, when you speak to
Hmm.
them in their mother tongue, it's very different. It's this almost like immediate visceral connection. And I think that experience more than anything made me realize that like whatever I did in my career, I really wanted it to be people focused and connection focused. I wanted that at the center of it. And, I think particularly like studying abroad in Jordan and being able to like speak in Arabic to people, and it was like people that I would never have been able to actually access otherwise because they didn't speak English. That was like amazing to me, and I was like, oh, that's so
Hmm.
cool. I really enjoyed sort of like unlocking new experiences and people through that, and I think like taking a step back on the humanities level, I think humanities more broadly teaches you, which is, I'd say in today's world, more important than ever, to sit with ambiguity and to hold multiple interpretations at once without needing to resolve them immediately. And I think this understanding that two people can look at the same information and come to different conclusions. And I'd say, yeah, arguably, it's a extremely important skill in early stage and not just investing, early stage anything. Investors and founders who cannot tolerate uncertainty don't last very long. And yeah, given how fast everything is moving in today's world, it's a super important skill.
I want someone to shout that from the rooftops, honestly. Just the ability to sit with ambiguity. Absolutely. And towards the start of our conversation, your concern about the people and the whole question of where we're heading in terms of AI, and then also, the future of work and thinking about the people's question and all of this. And I can see that being a through line. Part of what I enjoy talking about on this podcast is not just about paths taken and what those paths look like, but also paths that you might have not taken. And I think we were chatting some time ago, and you mentioned that you almost joined a big three consulting firm. And I won't name them, but I'll let you if you'd like to. Why didn't you go for it?
I got very, very close. I will admit that. If I'm honest, I think part of me really wanted the validation and the stamp of approval on my CV because I think studying languages, or maybe in many of the humanities subjects, people have experienced this, but it's not. There's a little bit of feeling like you need to prove yourself. Like if people found out I was an investor first, I'd be really surprised that I studied languages. Be like, how did you get here? And vice versa. And so I think like part of me kind of wanted it to be like, "See, I can do this." But I remember that offer and then realizing, like, I would be joining to prove something to people whose opinion maybe I didn't value that much. And it is a bit of an oversimplification. I think it does open doors for you. I think it is an amazing network of super talented people that you get to meet early on. So I think there are definitely pros to making that decision. But I was really lucky enough to have been introduced to Jan, the founder of Emerge, around the same time I was going through final interviews with this firm. The backstory to that is the only sort of corporate role I was considering was that. And then I was deciding between a few ed tech companies because education had always been a big passion for me. Education and climate, I thought, like, these are the two big problems. Like, if we don't solve for both of these, like, nothing else matters. And so yeah, I was looking at a few ed tech companies. It was actually a recruiter at one of the companies who then became a friend of mine who said, "Hey, before you make this decision, there's someone I want you to meet. He's super smart. He asks great questions. He happens to be hiring, but ignore that part because I know you have no interest in VC." So I actually went to go meet this guy to be like, "Hey, which job should I take?" And he said, "No, no, no, take my job." And then he gave me the backstory
Whoa.
of Emerge, the backstory of how he got there. He got a scholarship to study at Oxford, and it just changed his life. And he built this firm from the ground up, originally as an angel syndicate. And yeah, I think like a lot of things really connected when I met him, and so it was at the same time as these final interviews. And I actually was living in Egypt at the time, and I had the worst case of food poisoning I had
Oh
ever
boy.
had. And I remember thinking, like, if I ever make it out of here, do I want to be spending my days figuring out how to sell more toilet paper for Unilever? Or do I want to be investing in early stage founders who are like dragging the present to meet this future that they think is so exciting and worthwhile building? And like when I pictured it like that, it felt pretty clear to me that I would be betraying myself to have decided the other.
Whoa. Hell yeah. That is a weird dichotomy, but that really just puts it in my mind's eye of seeing what you were looking at. And timing. The timing of it is incredible as well, I have to say.
It was definitely very fortuitous, for sure.
Yeah. Not the food poisoning though. Sorry to hear about
No,
that.
no, no,
But
not that. It was so bad.
oh man. Well, diving into the work that you're doing right now at Emerge, focusing on the future of learning, of work, could you pick up on one trend that you think is real? And maybe even one that you think is hype around AI and education and the future of work?
The first one that comes to mind is obviously, like, I think, like, automation of workflows through AI, but I wanna pick a sexier one because everyone is talking about that. Um, I think, like, on the real side, I think the death of the degree as a sort of primary signal of human capital or skill, you know? For a century, I think, like, university credentials were shorthand for, like, "This person can learn, think, execute well, you should hire them." And I think AI is collapsing that as a signal because the skills gap, between a self-directed learner with great tools, and a graduate without them is now wider than ever. And the gap between like graduates, it's like wider than the gap between graduates of different universities. You know, like employers are already feeling this. It's been the case for a long time, but I think this is just really accelerating that difference. Institutions haven't caught up yet, but they will have to. And so it'll be really
Mhm.
interesting to see this. You know, I think like, there've been many companies saying that they are now removing the requirement for a university degree in their hiring, but you look at the numbers, it hasn't quite aligned with that. But I think we're going to see people moving more and more in that direction. And we're seeing now already like AI fluency being a requirement in many jobs. And I don't think that has to be correlated with the university degree at all. On the hype side, I think, you know, I will go to the topic that everyone is talking about, but I mean, I think that
Go
comes
for
hand
it.
in hand with it being a hype topic is this like AI adoption. And I don't know if hype is the right word, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about it because if we're looking at particularly like enterprise AI and like companies using AI, there's something strange happening because you have almost 90% of companies that report using AI in at least one of their business functions, but only 5% of them are actually achieving whatever they call value is at scale. And so the remaining 95% are stuck in this sort of we call like a pilot trap, endlessly experimenting and rarely deploying and like never actually scaling. And meanwhile, there's this like parallel reality unfolding on the ground where you have this like documentation of, I think it's like a 68% year over year surge in what we call shadow AI usage. So like you have this like striking disconnect. Like people, I think like everyone is like, oh yeah, everyone is using AI so much and I'm getting left behind. And like all these orgs are like implementing all these tools. But like, I
Yeah.
think the question is like, are organizations actually piloting like the wrong initiatives? And most employees have discovered that, one, either they're panicking and they're not really using AI, and that's happening in a lot of cases. And the ones that are,
Mm.
they've discovered that that's what's actually working is what we call shadow AI. So these systems they have on the side that they're not really reporting. They're people tinkering and building, on the weekends maybe or like in their spare time.
Right.
But yeah, I think like we hear a lot about how like everyone is using it online, and I think it's not quite there, like there's a lot of spend going into this category from companies. Whether
Mhm.
employees are actually using it is an entirely different question. So I think there's a lot of hype around that. And there's a big gap to bridge between bringing in these tools so employees can do their jobs better and hopefully actually get rid of the admin parts of their job that they don't like so they can focus on the sort of higher order judgment, more exciting parts. There's a gap
Right.
between that, which is the goal, and what's actually happening today. And so I guess part of that is also to be like, one, hype, but two, like, don't panic if you feel like you're behind because everyone feels that. And like, if you look at the stats, that is
Interesting.
quite, that is the case.
No, and it would be interesting to see, I guess, the moment in which this, I'll call it correction, happens. So we'll keep an eye out. Definitely we'll be paying attention to whatever you post and discuss about this on your channels as well. There might be a young person listening to this podcast right now that wants to build something quite similar to what you've done so far, but doesn't feel, let's say, technical. What are some steps that they can implement over a week or a month to get momentum?
I feel that. I feel that a lot. I think like I often still, have a bit of an imposter syndrome about not being technical enough. And, maybe I should have studied something else. And I think like the key thing to remember is technical is such a moving target, Like the things that are permanently valuable, identifying a real problem, talking to people who are experiencing it, listening to them, articulating a solution clearly, persuading someone to try it, being able to rapidly experiment. Those are not technical skills, Like go find, if you want concrete steps, go find 10 people who have the problem that you're interested in and just
Right.
listen to them for a month. Do you think you've spoken to enough people? Add a zero to it, probably, Like by the end, you'll know more about what you should be building than any boot camp is going to teach you. And you'll probably find that you actually don't need to write a line of code to get started anymore. AI in many ways is moving so fast that it keeps resetting the starting line. Everyone is
Mm,
learning. And like I said, I totally understand. I get stressed sometimes that I'm not technical enough, that I'm not leveraging AI enough. But it's important to keep trying things, keep iterating, keep learning things. And the other thing I would say is also like, don't wait for permission. I think I can't remember who was talking about this, but I heard someone talking about the fact that like kids when they're born are so agentic. Like they see something, they go grab it, they want to put it in their mouth, they will do it, even if it's a shoe. But like school spends, years and years just training this out of you, like sit in
yeah.
rows, raise your hand, ask for permission, do what everyone else does. And I think part of building is like remembering this agency that we all have. And trying
Mm,
and so, yeah, I think there's a lot of like permissionless building that we want to see because otherwise, like I think like if we don't try and talk about this more and maybe get more people who feel uncomfortable just doing things to try that out, what ends up happening is like the only people that do tend to be the people in history who are like told that, oh yeah, like, building a company or being a CEO of a company is people like you, because historically everyone has looked like you, has come from the same background as you. There's a certain category of people who maybe like have more audacity. And I think we just need to like democratize audacity a little bit more.
I dig it. I was speaking to my mom the other day, and she was reminding me of when I was a little kid, I think maybe around the age of 5 or 6. And she walked in on me with my hair in a bun, but cutting up my hair. And terrible example, but I was a high agency kid back then. I said I wanted shorter hair and I went for it. Um,
But
which is
you'll
not
get
exactly what
that,
we're talking.
you know.
Exactly, exactly. Low stakes. Actually, scissors in my hands were high stakes. I really do dig that response. So, would it be fair to say that you're living out of suitcases most of the time at this point?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. How does this lifestyle contribute or I guess synergize with what you're doing with your day to day and work?
So yeah, I mean, for some context, I actually, since university, so I was living in Jordan, COVID happened, then we were building Adventure and it was all remote. The rest of my university degree was remote. And all of our team was remote. So I continued building it while traveling around the world. And when I joined Emerge, we're London based as a fund. We have an office there. Everyone else in the team is based there, but they're in the office once a week. And, very small team, 3 partners, and myself, senior associate, finance director, researcher. That's it. And, the partners have young kids, so they work from home most of the days, which I totally understand. And like, it's great that we have that flexibility. But I basically said to them, like, hey, like, can I, work remotely? I'll keep my UK hours and I'll come back once every quarter to see the team, spend time with you guys. And very lucky that they said yes. I have to give a massive shout out to my team for giving me that flexibility. It's not something I take for granted, but it means I've been able to work and see the world and work remotely from like Argentina, South Africa, Japan, Serbia. It's been really incredible. And I think what it gives me more than anything is perspective. it keeps me out of the bubble. I think when you're embedded in tech or VC in London or San Francisco, it is so easy to mistake your immediate environment for the whole world. And I remember distinctly when ChatGPT first came out, within a few months, everyone in the tech sphere was acting like the entire planet was using this thing daily. And like that it was going to be the end of the world in like 3 months. Meanwhile, I would meet people on a hike in like, I don't know, Sydney, who would ask me if it's the new dating app or something. I think people laugh, but it is actually not even as far from the truth as you think because
Right.
even as of early this year, only around 13%, like 1/3 of the global population is actively using AI tools, which is like 1 billion people, which sounds like a lot, obviously, until you realize that it's
Right.
leaving like 7 billion people behind. So meeting people from
Yeah.
very different cultures and backgrounds, economic realities all the time, I think constantly recalibrates your sense of what technology actually means in most people's lives, what their hopes are, what their fears are, what problems they're trying to solve. And I think that's actually a big asset in the work that I do. And I will say, I think I am also an advocate for in-person work, and I think it's great to be in the office every day with your colleagues. And a lot of our community is quite spread geographically. I run our venture partner community, which is 100 of the world's leading founders and C-suite in the future of work and learning space. So from like OpenAI, Microsoft, Duolingo, Kahoot, Blinkist, all these companies, Masterclass that I remember like growing up and being like super excited about. And then I got to meet the people who actually built these products. And so it's been a great experience there. But they live all over as well. So, it's
Right.
I get to meet up with them in different places. Sometimes we meet up in Cape Town, which is amazing, or currently where I am now in Singapore. So that's fantastic. And then we're also global investors. So we speak with early stage founders anywhere in the world. So yeah, majority of what I do every day is on Zoom anyway. And then sometimes I have the good fortune of being able to sort of cross paths with someone in person, which is lovely.
I completely see the example you provided. I was recently in a rural part of Uganda, and that was something that occurred to me. So many of my conversations nowadays, even in the climate space, are inundated with AI. And you go to an area that is using mobile money, but only for remittance purposes. And the question of AI is just so irrelevant. And that was a sense of perspective that I think was very helpful. But I imagine in your line of work, when it's like kind of the bread and butter at this point of time, that perspective helps to keep one grounded and then actually see when we're thinking about the future of work. What does it look like contextually? But given the environmental changes and moving around that do you have a constant practice, let's say, that remains no matter where you are, or activities that you will seek out no matter where you are?
I mean, waking up and checking my Oura ring. No, but honestly, I'm so not a habit person at all. So take this with a pinch of salt. I keep my UK hours wherever I am in the world, which is good because I want to be online at the same time as my colleagues. But I'm otherwise like pretty terrible with any consistent routine. And I think given, I'm not even traveling within the same continent, it is very random. I think it's really difficult. Even, I have a few hobbies. I particularly like salsa and I like surfing. I think salsa you find in most cities. So maybe that's the
Sure.
most like common one. I try and do that in most cities that I'm in, but otherwise, it really depends what's on offer in places. Like, I do kickboxing when I'm in Thailand, but I started bouldering when I was in Dubai. So like, just depends where I am. Um, I try and often fail, but I do try to write something most days, even if it's like a sentence or two, sometimes longer. Observations, thoughts, something that maybe caught my attention, nothing formal. I have just come to notice really that I think people who write regularly, you can usually tell because they tend to be very articulate when they speak. They have more clarity of thought. And that's something I want to keep cultivating, even though life makes it very easy to skip. And sometimes you feel like you have nothing to say. I think maybe like 2 years ago, I met someone on a hike in Cape Town who convinced me to start a journal. And, varying consistency, but that's probably the closest thing to something like a habit.
To our listeners, I have to say, Zara is an amazing writer, and I'll add her Substack into the show notes so you can go read up on whatever it is that she's writing about. I truly enjoy reading them, and they always,
Thank you.
always make me think. So that leads me to our final question. What does winning look like for you personally in the next 12 months?
So on a professional level, definitely backing some amazing early stage founders to emerge. So if you happen to be listening in and you or someone you know are building something in the future of learning, work, or HR tech, I definitely want to meet you. On the personal front, actually, glad you mentioned the Substack. Thank you for the shout out. It's actually more writing. I started the Substack last year in August after a really long time of putting off sharing my writing publicly. And I committed to I was on vacation with a bunch of my friends, had rented a villa somewhere, and I told them all, like, you know what? I'm gonna publish something. I committed to it. And so at the end of the 2 weeks, I did share it. But I would love to be doing that regularly. And then more broadly, I think just learning. AI has made us busier than ever. We automate things and then immediately take on more things. And the time we devote to actual learning and personal development gets squeezed into the smaller and smaller box. And so winning to me is really pushing against that and making space to grow, to think slowly, to read things that maybe aren't immediately useful, but add to this understanding we have of, how we can do our work better, how these systems work, and what we need to invest in today to actually enable a more equitable future that really works for people.
Mhm.
And honestly, just to figure out like how we really make sure that AI is augmenting our thoughts and our lives rather than quietly replacing them. And so I think that's the question of the next decade. So I would like to spend the next 12 months getting a lot closer to my own answer on that.
Love that. And I will personally be attempting to copy and paste that into my own life. So thank you. Zara, I feel like I could talk to you for ages and learn from you. Your stories always inspire me, and the work you're doing continues to do the same. Thank you so much for joining us on Next Gen Doers.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
That was Zara Zaman, investor, head of platform at Emerge, co-founder of Edventure, and someone who is deeply dedicated to matching technology to real human needs around learning and work. The thing that stuck with me most is her idea of democratizing audacity, that if we want a different future, we have to actively get more people comfortable with doing things without asking permission first. That's a pretty good insight for life in general. And the idea of agency being continuous. We ought to ask ourselves, is what we're doing actually serving us? Is it aligned with what we say we want? That's worth sitting with. Zara writes on Substack about the future of work, technology, and everything in between. I'll link it in the show notes. She's as good on the page as she is in conversation. And if you're building something in the future of work or learning, she wants to hear from you. Find her details in the show notes. If this episode sparked something for you, share it with someone who needs the nudge to just go build the thing. And if you're enjoying Next Gen Doers, a review helps more people find us. Until next time, go do something.